So your mission was to save 1 billion admin hours. Why does this matter to you so much personally? Do you feel you've been taken in by the AI hype and done something which is a gimmick?
Procurement's a pretty nice area of the market to be able to change. Commercial managers, commercial directors, they want these systems, they want visibility, they want control, they're pretty process orientated.
Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Project Flux podcast. I'm joined with Yoshi today. How are you, Yoshi?
Excellent, mate. How are you?
I'm really good. I'm really excited for today. Loads of big news to talk about. And we've got a fantastic interview with Alastair Blenkin from Procure Pro, a new product that's been released to the construction industry. And he's going to talk about his experience and how AI is playing a big role in Procure Pro. So hang about for that. But as usual, we just want to say a big thank you to our sponsors, Construct AI, who've been with us since pretty much the very beginning. There's a link in the show notes to their product if you want to trial it out. And they're always adding new features in. So please do take the time to click on the link and try out Construct AI. And I'm also really pumped, Yoshi, because we've got a lot of big news again this week. So, and one of them actually is some thoughts from you. So I'm really looking forward to getting into that a bit later on in the podcast. But I guess the big news this week has been the release of ChatGPT tasks. So it sounds pretty innocuous, like what does that mean? Is it just a task manager? But it's actually quite a big step because it's the first time OpenAI have gone down this agentic workflow type route. And even though it's baby steps, I suppose, in a lot of ways, it's very simplistic in what it does, don't dismiss how powerful it is. So basically what they've got is a tool that you can say to it, for instance, every day at 8 o'clock, provide me with all the latest news on the Premier League, whatever it may be, or construction or whatever it may be. And it will then at that time set up a workflow to go and fetch all that news and bring it back to you and in an email or in a message that's waiting for you in ChatGPT. So pretty cool, right? To start with. And then I was thinking about it more, like what does that actually mean for us? And it's really quite powerful because you can set it to do all kinds of things. So it could be for automating some of your admin work, anything where you've got to set a reminder for yourself to go and do something on the internet, you can effectively get it to do. And it can be pretty smart about the scheduling. So for instance, you could say every weekday morning, or you could say, on weekends, and you can have that recur. And I also get the feeling that this is only the very beginning. There's got future capabilities coming. So even though it seems quite simple and you have to kind of scratch your head for a little while to kind of think how it's going to apply to you, once you actually get your head around it, and I've already set up about 3 or 4 of these, it's pretty powerful. And then it gets your brain thinking about where they're going with this. And it won't take too much for you to join the dots as to where they're going with it. What was your take on it?
So I like the emphasis on it being their first agentic workflow. I mean, you don't really notice that if you're a user, you won't see any of that, but it is agents that are powering the functionality in the background. Yeah, so I wouldn't say it was so much a task manager, more a task scheduler, because what it's missing is the interface to be able to actually manage your tasks, like through a Kanban or through a Gantt or something like that. So it is just using natural language with the chatbot interface to tell it what you need to do and when, and it will provide the task. I tried it and I do like its early entry functioning, right? So I gave it a list of tasks for kind of a solution that I'm developing, okay? And the tasks themselves, some of them were interconnected and some of them were discrete. I gave it the list of tasks and then it said, okay, initially it bucketed them all together and said, okay, we're going to remind you about these tasks next week. And I said, no, I'd rather you remind me of each individual task at a different time. It then said, when do you want to set these tasks? So I said, set these tasks for me, knowing that they, are a high priority. What it actually did, when I thought that was quite smart, was it added contingencies or dependencies. So it's using its reasoning, tasks that it assumed to precede another task, it would put before the other. And I thought that was quite smart because it had, without much context, it had to be able to link those together. Now, in terms of the progression, yes, it will start from simple natural language prompting for tasks, but I think that will grow to projects. I think it can start to manage, large scale major projects, for instance. I've got, different types of project methodologies. And I think the again, like most technologies at the moment, once you connect these things into other third-party tools, will it become more powerful? So for instance, the ability to link with your actual calendar. So we looked at that on the newsletter. We mentioned that was a future integration that they could look at: calendars, email, even project management tools. If you're using, I don't know, the many other tools that you can get for project management, for instance, that would be awesome. So that's where it is at the moment, and there is potential. But one thing that OpenAI always do is they always test the waters with what they have. The only thing is that sometimes they don't always follow through with finishing it. Like with the GPT canvas, it was like, it's there. Has it really improved?
And it's gone. I noticed the canvas feature has actually gone from the models you can select. You just got to hope it pops up in the right context. And sometimes I admire that approach from OpenAI, which is let's just chuck it out and see how it goes down. But sometimes it does leave it cold. And I think it's the same thing with tasks. They're obviously building up to a much more advanced agentic system, and reportedly they've even got a name for it, called Operator, that will be able to write code and book travel. So that's where they're going with this. It's going to be able to have computer vision, and you'll be able to look at your screen. So this is just a very, very thin end of a wedge, but it's significant because it's the first one. And even then, with a very simplistic thing, I can still find use cases. What I found a little bit frustrating was, I get an email every morning, or is it an email, or something pops up, a notification pops up to say, your little task is here. And sometimes when you click onto it, it doesn't always work. I don't know if maybe it's just my system. Did you find any problems, some bugs with kind of clicking on the link?
I've not found problems with that, but I found problems across ChatGPT itself since that launch.
Really? Okay.
When I'm getting outputs, when it gives you 2 different responses and it asks you which one you prefer, the responses don't load. It's happened to me about 10 times. So ever since that release, I've had problems elsewhere on ChatGPT, and that could just be me. But for a company of that size, I do feel as though it should have been a lot better.
What you mean, more slick?
More slick. Task manager, like being able to see your task in a typical view, like a Kanban, then use natural language to move that about, would be better.
Yeah, and maybe that's what will come in the end. But I think, like you say, they wanted to get it out, and it's probably something in advance of this operator function that's going to be a lot more advanced. Yes, but I think let's take it to a project scenario. So if you're delivering a project, whatever it may be, you could definitely make use of this right now. So say, for instance, you're a project manager on a construction project. You could set a task along the lines of, every morning at 6 a.m, let me know around any news in this particular area where your construction site is, and the weather, and whatever else you might want to know about that area, like traffic problems. And then every morning you'll get this condensed version of everything that's happening around your site. So that's just a really simple use case of where you could use it right this second.
Yeah, exactly. So the use cases there is up to your creativity, to be honest. I think I like a lot of use cases for large language models, especially as we move into the agent space. A lot of the capability is down to your creativity.
Yeah, exactly. Before we move on from the story, I just wanted to touch on something which we're probably going to talk about a bit more in next week's newsletter. But there's a heck of a lot of rumours in the rumour mill at the moment about OpenAI. I don't know if you've been keeping an eye on the Twitter sphere or the X sphere, whatever they call it now. There's a lot of rumours that OpenAI have developed something so powerful that they've actually called important meetings with government officials to talk about it and the implications of it. Now, Sam Altman has come out and said, with a tweet saying, we're not releasing AGI anytime soon, don't get too excited. But that goes against a lot of his narrative over the last few weeks, where he's been kind of talking it up. So I wonder if that is an attempt by him to kind of calm down some of the hysteria that he's built himself. And do we think that something big is on the horizon, or do we think this is just another episode in the normal kind of peaks and troughs cycle on X, where people get very excited and then it comes to nothing?
Yeah, so we'll cover this in more detail next week. But what I think this is, Sam did say a few months ago that first of all, he doesn't like the word AGI, but when AGI is here, it won't be smacked in your face. It will be something which happens gradually, right? So his comments still align with that. They also still align with the fact that he said in his most recent or one before that AGI will be here in a few thousand days. So he has
he did.
backtracked on that few thousand days comment. But what he has done is he's recognized how buzzed the AI community gets when they see a model developing and maturing in terms of its intelligence. And the reasoning for this, right, is because competition's hotting up. So again, next week we might also cover DeepSeek's R1 model, which apparently
Definitely
is just as good as O1 and Claude 3.5 Sonnet. And it is actually closer to OpenAI's initial philosophy of open sourcing, not for profit, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's what's happened. Equally, Sam sits in a table with very influential people in AI, which is going to have a massive second and third order consequence of impact in businesses, in users, in public sector, in AI governance, and all these different things. If you just just keep mentioning AGI and the things that you can do. Remember, when he mentions AGI, surprisingly, he actually doesn't mention money as such, even though, there's this whole conversation around, his financial winnings or what you might get from running OpenAI. But he actually talks about biology quite a bit and healthcare and medicine. So
yeah, but the new definition, from what I understand from OpenAI about what AGI is that it's a certain figure, certain
100 million
amount of 100 billion or something.
100 billion or something like
So
that. Yeah.
they have now tied the definition of AGI to financial outputs.
But that was because of Microsoft's pressure. Because Microsoft, I think it was Mustafa Solomon was the first one he mentioned that the first when AI can make 1 million or something is when it will be at a level similar to humans.
Yeah, it was more than that. It was more than 1 million.
But I think we'll have to wait and see, really. But yeah, to quote what he actually said, he said that the Twitter hype or something is out of control and we need to temper our expectations by at least 100 times.
Yeah, I'm not sure I buy that. I think, there's obviously something brewing. And also there's rumors that this latest version of ChatGPT is creating its own language that the human beings can't understand. So we're getting into quite deep territory, which is kind of beyond the scope a little bit of this podcast. But I just wanted to raise it because it does feel like there's something happening, like there's a shift, and I'm not quite sure where this is going because we are moving.
I reckon we say we won't talk about it, but it'll be so important that when it does come, we'll need to talk about it.
Well, yeah, when it happens, but the rumor, we could go down a rabbit hole with rumors and not come out of it. And we've got a really, really important interview to go to, so we're not going to stay there too long. But I do want to stick on OpenAI for the next story, actually. So they also have changed, they removed their commitment that AI models should aim to be politically unbiased by default. So again, lots going on there, and that's massive for me. And this is at the same time as the Trump administration, Trump 2.0, as they're calling it, have come into power, and all the tech titans were at the very front row of his inauguration. So they really have changed. You talk about DeepSeek and their philosophy is more akin to the original philosophy of OpenAI, whilst OpenAI has really changed. They're trying to become a for-profit company, and now they're endorsing politically, well, they're not endorsing it, but they're removing the language around politically unbiased AI. Is that something significant, or are we...
No, it is significant because as more and more humans start to prompt a lot of these models, we are also changing the way that we communicate, and that itself will create a level of social engineering, right? So I think that's really important. However, going back a long way to the podcast that Amanda Laskell mentioned when she was developing Claude's character, it's very difficult to keep models impartial because it's hard to control them. Predictability gets a lot harder, especially as these models become more and more powerful because they're black box in the way that they think. So controlling and saying you have to remain impartial on all matters is going to be difficult. Secondly, I think as we move forward, there is more of an emphasis that AI models need to be a lot more anthropomorphic, need to be a lot more resonate with humans, and humans speak with emotion. We don't speak, impartially ourselves. And then thirdly, maybe it is the fact that because Donald Trump has won, they want to lean on that side. So it's better to have a side. I don't like fences.
Yeah.
I think it's better to have a viewpoint than have none because then you can learn something from that person.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think there is a risk. It is important, but again, it's one to just see which way they actually lean on in terms of that subjectivity or biasness.
Yeah. And I mean, Elon Musk has come into this as well. He's blaming it on the fact that, a lot of these models are trained in the San Francisco area, which has a reputation for being a bit more woke,
Oh,
for want of a better word. And they're worried that a lot of that is coming into the models. And there is evidence of that as well. So I can understand it both ways. And the headline does kind of maybe deceives it. It kind of says OpenAI quietly revises policy doc to remove reference to politically unbiased AI.
bad
Which
thing is,
makes it sound like a bad thing when actually what they're trying to say is we don't want it to become too.
but one thing I would say though is that now, when you were coming to evaluate a lot of the models, or people were evaluating which model was better, they were using benchmark performance, so pure intelligence and subject matter expertise. Now, people are going to be evaluating models on politics or
Yeah,
political viewpoints. So
that
that,
is interesting.
so it kind of demotes the level of evaluation that we give to some of these models, and therefore we could be relying on the models that we actually prefer because of their viewpoints and personalities. So that can lean, or that can feed into confirmation bias and all these different things, which can sway the way that we think. And we can say, oh, it's right though because the AI told us it was right and validate it. So there is a risk now, and the AI
Yeah, there is.
to visit this.
Well, again, there is a shift happening, isn't there? Because Zuckerberg's come out with his statement that they're doing away with the fact checkers and following, in terms of social media, the kind of way the community notes route that Elon Musk has done on X. So there's definitely a move away from this being very prescriptive about the way you do things and letting the community take care of itself. And I'm sure the same will happen with AI. There'll be, depending on your political viewpoint, maybe you'll use a certain type of AI model, which is what you're saying, isn't it, basically?
Yeah, it's like Carl Sagan's quote when he once said that, when you're continuously bamboozled, you'll start to lose recognition that you are actually bamboozled, and you'll come to reject it.
Yeah,
Whether or
yeah.
not you're actually reaching the truth is going to be hard to tell because these things are socially engineering us.
Yeah, absolutely. So some big news from OpenAI this week. Quickly going on to two other stories we've got in the newsletter. So one of them is actually a piece that I wrote for the APM magazine, which is the Association of Project Managers magazine, which was really revisiting what we talked about a few weeks ago, which was predictions for 2025 and a look back at 2024. So we won't cover that in too much detail, but we thought we'd put it up here because that's going out to a whole range of project professionals. And it'd be good to get some feedback on that and my views there. But then, unashamedly, we've done two pieces where we've spoken this week. Your piece, Yoshi, your blog was really interesting. So again, you can get access to it through the newsletter, but we'll put it on the show notes too. Do you just want to give everyone the gist of it?
Yeah, so basically I wrote this thought piece or essay out of frustration because me, like other people, kept telling people that, AI is going to come and take our jobs. It will elevate the capabilities that humans do or the tasks that we do to higher value tasks. And for me, that was quite ambiguous and vague, right? I didn't think it made sense. So what I tried to do was try to distill what I believe, how I believe humans, the way that humans and AI thinks is slightly different. Okay. And I effectively look at it through systems, emergence, compositionality, and plasticity. And the way that I do that is basically saying, okay, systems are what gives us the skeleton of the structure for the way that we think. Okay. And in deep learning models and within humans, it's quite similar. Okay. So we have edges and nodes in AI, and we have neurons, and we have synapses, and the other biological phenomena we have within our brains. Now, what I found really important was using that. You can see how the layers that we have within these systems, okay, and the intricacies and the convolutions that we have lend to complex behavior. And no one single behavior can be brought about can be attributed to a single neuron or a single edge or node, for instance. So you have to take these things in as holistically, right? Now, what I then said is when you have more complex systems, that gives you an emergence of behavior. Okay, so this is what actually happens. What we actually feel and resonate with and see in terms of behavior is what these systems allow. Okay, now with emergence, again, you can't then say one behavior is linked to one single neuron or one single component within an AI system. It's taken together. Okay, so the ability to recognize a face, for instance, done hierarchically. It's done through this complex system. I then talk about how now within that is there are differences in the way that humans are emergence of thought and the way that AI thinks. Okay, because AI itself is top down, it's goal driven, it's there to exist to serve humans in our tasks, whereas humans have a bottoms up perception of things. Okay, so when we come to think, not only do we think in terms of solving tasks, we color our perceptions with qualia. So these are the lived in experiences that we have as humans. And that information, that subjective, qualitative experiences as humans gives us intelligence to be able
So
to...
what's qualia? Just like sort of break it down for people. What does that mean? Is that just the things that you've lived through, your kind of experiences?
Yeah, so qualia is that subjective personhood or the subjective experience you have as you go through life, through your sensory perceptions. Okay, and it's what gives things meaning. So, for instance, I can solve a puzzle. You can give an AI a puzzle to solve, right? But we can redefine the meaning of that puzzle. We can give that puzzle itself meaning. It colors the things that we do, and with that allows us to tackle more higher cognitive tasks. For me, like relationships or moral dilemmas and all of these things, whereas an AI will effectively just focus on pattern recognition.
Because you're joining dots, like something that happened to you 10 years ago that sort of impacted you, but you didn't realize it might then impact a decision that you make later on, and you don't even know it's impacting your decision. Is that what you're kind of saying?
Exactly, like that gut instinct that you get when you get a gut instinct of something. So the way that I can explain it is, when you have coffee, for instance, right, you associate that with energy or like the nice smell of it and it's the bitterness of it. And AI won't really understand that. Or for instance, when you're looking at a piece of artwork and you're looking at this AI generated by a human, you typically prefer when it's done by a human because you understand the emotion and the sentiment that's gone into building that. It's built with that person's experience of life, and that's what we resonate with. And the way that I would explain it best is that qualia is basically the way that we understand the world from the inside, right?
Yeah.
And that's how I put it best. And all of these things together, and I've missed compositionality actually. So with emergence, you have the servicing of thought, which is enabled by the system. But then with emergence, you have this spectrum. And this is how I actually measure human intelligence for me, is you have different levels of emergence of thought or thought emergence, okay? Now, in higher cognitive tasks, it all depends on compositionality, okay? So for instance, compositionality is how well can you take everything around you, so symbols and language and emotion and numbers, everything that you can, put it together to make sense of something that you see.
I see, yeah.
Okay, now
some of its parts.
Exactly. So compositionality is actually a language term, which basically means that the meaning of a sentence itself is understood by its word maker. And that's the same thing here. So we integrate all of these things. Okay. And I don't want to talk on too much further, but then also with compositionality, humans are able to achieve or complete tasks without much instruction, without explicit instruction. We can do that. Whereas an AI typically works within its parameters, right?
Yeah.
But AI itself is more optimized. So once it has a task that it can do very well and it knows, it will do it a lot better than a human. The only other two things that humans have as an advantage is adaptability, something that they've never seen before. We can recompose parts of our knowledge in something of new, right? Like learning a new language, language to a bottoms-up language, for instance.
And I guess it doesn't get meaning from it. I mean, it reminds me of the analogy, you can productionize something like someone making a pin. If you break it down to the constituent parts, you can make a lot more, but you turn it into a factory conveyor belt thing. But then the people doing those constituent parts won't get the same meaning compared to the one person creating the one pin themselves. Exactly. And that's something that AI is really good at, because they haven't got the feelings. But for a human being, it's something that sometimes is really important because it gets and I agree with you. I think that's something that AI is going to be very, very difficult to
grasp.
So to grasp or to replicate, I suppose.
To replicate, yeah. And the other thing that I mentioned was reflection. So one of the ways that we're scaling intelligence at the moment for these AI models is reflection, right? So chain of thought, for instance. Now, chain of thought is good because you can get an output from an AI model. It can rethink its output in alignment to a criteria. If it isn't done well enough, it can continuously iterate through, so it becomes a lot more, the output is stronger, is better. But the thing is that AI model itself it doesn't do it at a metacognitive level. So it's not thinking about thinking. So we as humans change the way that we think over time, and we try to improve. We have these mental raises, we have heuristics. It doesn't do that as such. So I look at all of these things, and the last thing that I say is compositionality is what scales intelligence. I then say qualia itself, this lived-in experience or seeing the world from the inside, is a force multiplier across those dimensions of compositionality. And then lastly, I give it all to the biological phenomena, which is plasticity. So neuroplasticity is the ability for our brains to adapt and change. We can learn everything, answer anything, and become more than what we were before, easily, just like that through age. Whereas,
and that's why you called it the plastic thinker.
That's why I call it the plastic thinker. And there's so much more to it, right? I try to do this in a very condensed way. but I'll try and communicate this a lot better in the future. But this is kind of what I was focusing towards. And then I talk about what the future might look like, which is embodied cognition, physical AI, and agents which try to emulate qualia through sensory perception. You give these things ears, you give them eyes, you give them mouths, you give them the ability to touch and feel. That will allow them to inhabit the world around them, not just be a machine which lives in silico.
Yeah, deep stuff, mate. Deep stuff. So well worth checking out. Again, the link, we'll provide the link for you. But well, we hope you like our thoughts. So, in this newsletter, we've actually taken the liberty of giving some of our specific thoughts in articles or blogs. So let us know what you think about that. But I think we'll end the pulse there and we'll move on to the interview. So for now, Yoshi, thank you so much for your insights as always, and we'll see you next week.
Project Flux is here.
Today we have Alastair Blenkin from Procure Pro with us, who is the CEO and founder of Procure Pro. Welcome to the show, Alastair. Thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me, James. Yoshi.
Brilliant. And we've seen your tool in action, and we'll talk about it a bit more as the show progresses. But we were just saying before the recording starts, I love it when I see a piece of tech or something that truly does change the way that people are going to be able to change the workflows and speed things up. And that's what I think Pro does. So really excited to talk to you about the tool and what you think it offers to main contractors. But before that, can we just talk a bit about you? Because you actually took a bit of a route to where you are now, and you started your career as a lawyer, right? Working on major developments. So what made you step away from the legal profession to pursue this technology and entrepreneurship route?
Seeing the light, obviously. So, look, I started one of the big law firms in Australia, hence the Aussie accent.
Yeah.
I was sort of a bit less of a lawyer, more of a, just knew how to do work fast and self-professed efficiency king. So I worked in property doing major developments, but law was always just a pathway into business for me. So spotted an opportunity doing sort of the major capital transactions and the high volume leasing. And it was really that sort of volume repeatable contracting that a lot of people tried to run away from, didn't think was too sexy. And I really spotted an opportunity for automation and building verticalized contracting software.
Yeah, cool. And it's funny, isn't it? Because I keep an eye on the law profession, and that's another profession that is going through a big change at the moment. Do you keep an eye on what's happening there? And do you see big changes going on?
It's crazy. It's crazy, sort of the just resistance and unwillingness to change, and then how much they have, obviously, with AI coming to the fore. It's but it's good. It's positive. They just need to change their commercial model and stop charging by the hour. So.
Well, that's probably why they're so resistant to change, isn't it? They've got quite a nice model going.
It's a racket, that's for sure.
Yeah. Right, let's talk about, Procure Pro and your mission. So your mission with Procure Pro is to save 1 billion construction admin hours. So why does this matter to you so much personally?
Yeah, I think more than anything, it's about having impact for our team. The mission is quite simple. In terms of how we think about our business, we're delivering procurement software. So we're basically playing the productivity game. We're not Facebook, we're not playing the attention game. And so we know that when you use sort of the 5 core aspects of our product, which we call a procurement task, we deliver on average about 4 hours worth of savings. So it's a pretty simple measure for us to go, hey, are customers using the product? Are they using it well? And as a result, we can calculate the impact that our business is having on the industry and the world. And really, that's the crux of it. And watching the graph sort of grow exponentially is pretty motivating as well for the whole business.
Yeah, because there is so much wastage, isn't there? It's sometimes we take it for granted and we just assume that's the way it is, but it doesn't have to be.
It's also just aligned with what the customer wants, right? Sort of saving time is part of it, but it's what you do with that time then around being able to better manage risk, being able to spot opportunity, and fundamentally use your brain to do the things that it should be around finding, for QSs, ways to make money and not just pushing paper around.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that because coming from a QS background myself, the amount of time you would spend on activities like procurement, and no client ever pays you for the time you spent to get to the answer. They pay you for the answer and then the advice that comes with that. So the sooner you can get to that, the better for everyone involved, because I remember on the timeline, sometimes I'm talking about procurement and main contractors, and I know your software really looks at procurement and subcontractors, but it's the same principle in that, you've got weeks in that process from receiving the tenders back to then analysing it, lining them up, going through all the queries and answers. That's a huge chunk of any kind of construction program.
Yeah, and it sort of resonated with me when we first got going. We were talking to this construction director, and he goes to me and my co-founder. He goes, "Oh, look, we summed up all the hours that our in Australia contract administrators, equivalent of a QS, all the hours that they're supposed to work in a week if they do their job to absolute perfection." And it was 110 hours. And he goes, how many of them do you reckon are working 110 hours a week? Obviously, none. So it's as much about, then what you're not doing or kind of what you're letting slide that creates, risk or just adverse outcomes where you could have done better. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, I think, working in the construction industry, I mean, you said you saw the light with the law industry, but it's not like you've gone from one industry to another one, which is, really easy to embrace change. We are quite slow to adapt to new technologies. So how do you convince the main contractors to embrace Procure Pro?
Well, I'm a little bit contrarian in that narrative. I actually think the construction industry, in particular the commercial sector, and sort of as you get into those quite mature businesses, are pretty pro-tech. And that's not to say every facet of the business is. Like, I know when you're managing site teams and, the site manager who's done the same thing the same way for 50 years and doesn't want a bar of it, then that's certainly challenging. But I think certainly, from a back office perspective, there's a lot of appetite to do things better. If a bit of tech works, there's certainly, and they can see that it, stacks up, makes sense. There certainly is that willingness, if the timing is right, to give something a go. I think for us though, where that view's come from as well is procurement's a pretty nice area of the market to be able to change in terms of, QSs who are your power users, commercial managers, commercial directors. They sort of want these systems, they want visibility, they want control, they're pretty process orientated. And so it's an easier change that you can put onto a business compared to, say, and do it in a couple of months compared to ripping a document control system out that takes 2 years every time a new job comes on and you lose a bit of steam on that one.
Yeah, I suppose you're right in that, what your solution does is it kind of digitizes an existing process that people are familiar with and just makes it faster. So you think the image is a bit unfair about construction being a little bit laggardish?
I think where there's smoke, there's fire, right? Like there is absolutely, that in existence. But I think to kind of blanket the whole industry with everything's kind of slow and backwards doesn't always reflect, some of the good aspects that are happening. And I think if you kind of go and look back over the last, say, 10 or 15 years, you had obviously the internet age came about. Then you have smartphones, which is a huge driver. You sort of have the Aconexes, the Procures of the world with document control. And then there hasn't been this sort of huge amount of technological revolution. And then sort of almost like, 2015, 17, the pay apps, the hammer techs, those sort of, pointier solutions are coming through and you're really seeing, the speed of adoption of tech pick up, particularly the last few years, certainly since we've been around. So there is a lot to like and obviously, with AI coming in, that'll only accelerate.
Yeah. Well, let's stick on AI for a minute then, because and that's what this podcast is about, because we see great hope in, the power of AI. So whilst we've talked about your tool kind of digitizing or automating processes, how do you think AI and particularly kind of this agentic world and generative AI is going to change construction in the future?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that we always seek when talking about it to, the industry is seek to almost define it in a sense. Like, I think there's a lot of people who know what, ChatGPT and OpenAI have done to the world. Others don't necessarily. But when we look at it from a construction context, and it's really about, it's either summarizing things and producing and writing content, or it's taking a massive data set and automatically scanning it and looking for insights through it and bringing them to the fore. So instead of a person needing to go and, click through and sort of find a bit of information and make a decision on that, it's about extracting from those, layers down deeply an insight and that you can basically be proactively alerted of. So a good example, to make this practical for us is there's a huge topic in the industry around capacity of subcontractors and their workload. And so in times gone by, you've got the same company, but all these different projects and project teams are just making decisions, in the best interest of their project. They're operating in silos, not talking to each other. And sort of, once we do our thing and customers get going, the narrative changes to, hey, you've got project teams putting their heads together going, hey, I see this subby's, got 3 jobs they're bidding for at the moment. Can we put our heads together, have a bulk purchase opportunity, or hey, we need to manage this capacity risk? And that changes the decision making to what's in the best interest of the business as well as my project. And it's about kind of taking all of that information that might be hidden, away and making that a lot easier to make decisions on. So one small example of what we see in our space, but there's obviously, there's many, many use cases and a huge opportunity for impact.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, just being able to make better decisions with the data, that's the obvious benefit of AI immediately. But then going forward, I also see the opportunity to change the workflows because, the way that we do things is only a result of history and just, the way we've done things, but they're not necessarily the best way of doing things if you actually decompose the problem and looked at it from the ground up. And we're seeing that now in terms of agentic solutions. If we were to look at the flow, sometimes it doesn't make sense the way we do things. It's just the way we've always done that. Have you seen any of that where you looked at, particularly when you're putting something like Procure Pro together and you've kind of decomposed it and you've looked at it and go, why the hell are we doing it like that in the first place?
I think sort of like software 101, when it's designed well and built well, is how can you almost say take those spreadsheets and where you got 10 columns, simplify that down and bring the simple bits of information to the fore rather than every single bit of information you've had previously. So there's always those sort of opportunities. I mean, interestingly, the head of Microsoft's come out in recent weeks and said it's the death of SaaS in how many years' time. Why will you need a visual interface when you can just interact basically with chat? And so that's sort of putting it to an extreme around what the future might hold, which is realistic in time. But there's also a lot of that workflow that you talk about, James, that it's it's not as kind of simple as going, hey, we're going to just chat to everything and it'll do our job. We often think about when you're going, hey, what use cases can this technology be applied to through the lens of jobs to be done? If you can go, hey, AI can do this really cool thing, summarize this or whatever it is, but we do it once in a blue moon or it's a party trick, that's not as helpful as something that we're doing, day in, day out. So I think the big one for us and something that we're working on at the moment is all around extracting pricing insights. So we, at Procure Pro, procurement software, we got a whole lot of information around what stuff costs. That's live market pricing data. And so it's an ability for, the QS who's sitting there to interrogate basically the bowels of the system and go, hey, I'm about to procure concrete. What rates have we got on that? Or even down to a dishwasher, has this been bought somewhere recently? Sort of having that information at their fingertips. And it's not to say there's, silver bullets around benchmarking, but it's sort of almost that broader context that sits around it that makes you ask better questions or get a bit more negotiating leverage. So it's trying to be really practical about those use cases with the technology.
Yeah, because there's a lot of hype at the moment, isn't there? And everyone's trying to put in powered by AI features and everything. And the reality is it has to be useful, otherwise it won't stick. And it has to, what I always say, but especially in our industry, the tech has to be used to prompt better conversations, whether that's between the client and the contractor and the subbies. That's the whole point of it, is so that you're having data-driven conversations rather than slagging matches based on gut feels and the fact that that person looks at you in a certain way a few weeks ago. So I can see the power of it, but do you feel you've at all been taken in by the AI hype and done something which is a gimmick, or do you feel that all the AI features you've incorporated within Procure Pro are, like you say, for practical good reasons?
Yeah, look, I mean, to your point before, James, there's plenty of AI created in the marketing department. There's plenty of stuff which is just regular software engineering, which, to the untrained eye, people believe it's AI, or it's some pretty basic stuff. So I think it's not around going, hey, single thing we do is practical. Like, there's got to be a bit of experimentation. You throw in a few darts to kind of see what interests people. We've got sort of a presentation that we use to go, hey, there's sort of 10 really key use cases around procurement or AI use cases in procurement. So that's kind of your surfacing purchase opportunities, your tendering assistant going, hey, I can see you're short on coverage on these 4 trades. Would you like me to, I've found these other, 5 subbies who might be appropriate. Do you want me to send some additional invites out, or do you want me to chase them? And it's sort of almost, that nature of the co-pilot type stuff, which sort of gains a fair bit of traction. And there's other stuff that's, it is perceived as nice to have. I was talking to one CIO recently, and he was really excited about the design side of things because there's huge opportunities there. And he's saying, it's just that view of the impact of improving design on their projects is going to be huge. And then we had the conversation around pricing, and he goes, that could be huge. And then I shared some other ideas, and he's kind of just like, don't care as much. It is about going, hey, there's lots of opportunities to apply the technology. Which ones do people do really consistently that can take away the grunt work, give them back time in the day that they can put elsewhere?
Yeah. That's fundamentally what it's about.
Alastair, so just going back to what I think you mentioned, Satya, so the Microsoft CEO mentioned about software as a service is dying. Where do you see software in 10 years?
I mean, as a software founder, you've obviously got your own biases, but look, I certainly am a believer that the interaction with software will change. I'm seeing it already. I've got OpenAI on my desktop, and the amount of dictating that I just do to it to go quick answers or summarize this, rephrase that, I'll use it 100 times a day. And I'm trying to get the rest of our team to kind of do that as well. So I think once you really start using it, the power in it is huge. Do I think that it will kill SaaS? No, I don't. Maybe some basic functions and sort of ideally there'll be like a bit of a consolidation or it'll make things easier to integrate between systems. So there's some real advancement that will come, but I think the ability to say present information in a way that in this context that project teams need to deliver, multi-million pound construction projects, I don't think that's necessarily, it's going to kill it and there'll be no software in the world, but you certainly can see the future where you've got an earpiece in that replaces your phone and you just talk to it, or dare I say it, the chip in the arm in 50, 100 years time. So
just think to it.
Yeah, I've seen a few people mention that there's an edge towards, a lean towards increased personalization. And as these models and some of the AI becomes a lot smarter, we'll move from software to IntelliWare. So whereby the software itself can adapt to the user's specific use case. Do you think that's something that you look to leverage if that comes in the near future?
Well, I mean, we're doing that already in terms of, building our own specific, what in ChatGPT, basically your own specific instructions into the model. So from a marketing perspective, it's kind of just going, here's our tone of voice, here's our core topics. It's basically building the guardrails around, hey, here's how we like to deliver, a message. And then here's the topic that I want to talk about, sort of should sound like this, that, and the other. And here's what I want to say. And then it's going to give you a first pass. And then you're going, hey, that's not quite right. We go from there. So there's mechanisms to build that personalization in already from experience around just kind of baking your knowledge into it. And I think, certainly our outlook on it is you want to be ahead of this stuff rather than behind it. So I was sort of saying earlier, as we got started, where at the moment, basically carving off a portion of our business and creating basically a specialist R&D team that's sort of almost, it's entrepreneurship within a company. It's kind of going to be led by one of our co-founders. Here, guys, have some space to kind of just like be creative, talk to customers, experiment, see what you can do, iterate and test really, really quickly and go, hey, we've got this idea that we could basically, summarize, vendor ratings because we've got hundreds of them and see trends and go, would that be something that's useful? How can we sort of prove that out really, really quickly and then give it to an engineering team to execute on and to make sure that that's really robust and bring it to life. So yeah, there's I think there's plenty of opportunity obviously for personalization where you started there, Yoshi, but then sort of being intentional around, how you make the most out of, what I think is the biggest technological shift, since the internet came around.
Yeah, and I think that's so important, giving people space to experiment. That's where I've seen the best kind of results in our industry. And we get quite involved in hackathons and things like that, where, the industry comes together, contractors, consultants, clients, to try and, because we're all facing the same problems. And there's little point in all of us trying to solve the problems ourselves. So I'm a big believer in that approach. Going back to, you talked about Copilot, Alastair. Are you building kind of any agentic thing into Procure Pro? Do you see a need for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, when we think of, the QS Copilot, it's sort of going, hey, there's a series of jobs to be done that we can bucket up and go, is it, I want to find some pricing information on this sort of thing? Is it, I want to help manage coverage, and so on and so forth. So it's sort of a bucket of those jobs to be done and going, hey, we can sort of wrap that up, as whether you call it an agent. It's not necessarily sitting to the side. It's really intended to be, more part of the experience. So whether that does become a little, chatbot that you can pop up and sort of interact with, or whether, you're in a tender or a comparison or on a recommendation as a, commercial manager, commercial director, seeing a subcontractor, and you pop out, here are our historical rates, from the side. And it's about kind of taking the information that's traditionally sitting in a whole lot of spreadsheets over the last 10 years and going, how can we intelligently bring that to the fore?
Yeah, because we're so bad at that, aren't we? There is a lot of data in the industry, but we don't make good use of it, and we just let it evaporate. We just let it just go, and we then make the same mistakes again. So I think any kind of platform where you're actually harvesting that data in some way and then trying to make it available to whoever it is, contractors or clients to use is great. So what's the subbies' reaction to Procure Pro? Are they all thumbs up? Because I find often that's the weak point in the chain, that they're often the ones who aren't as maybe tech literate. Have you seen any resistance to the use of Procure Pro by the subbies?
Of course. No, look, practically, yeah, absolutely. But also your adoption rates kind of sitting on around sort of 70 or 80%. And I was expecting, 0, be lucky to get above 10. And look, that was almost one of the learnings I had early days. So when I quit my job as a lawyer, I went out to build this commercial real estate contracting tech first. Mm-hmm. And we had this platform with landlords, tenants, and their lawyers. It was this collaboration platform. Mm-hmm. And Lee Jasper, the founder of Aconex, I really vividly remember, said to me, look, the network effect sounds really sexy, when you're a bigger business and you got this big network, but in the short term, it works against you. And that's kind of that resistance to change. So we took that lesson, and how our product strategy was when we built Procure Pro was, we're going to build all of the builder side stuff to make sure that workflow stacks up in its own right before even introducing the subcontractor. So there's a whole lot of value there. And then when we did introduce the subcontractor, we made sure it was a frictionless experience. So they get an email, they click a link, it launches a web page, there's no login, there's no sign up, there's no fees. And that's actually just some of the really big problems that subcontractors have around kind of going, oh, it's not another login, or I have to sign up for this, I'm just going to charge it back to the main contractor anyway, in my invoices. So you remove a little bit parts of those friction, and the adoption rate actually does increase, because the main contractor's asking for some information, the subcontractor's going to give it to them one way or the other. If you can make everyone's lives easier by sort of, as long as the experience is genuinely easy, then you do actually get greater adoption than you'd suspect. And of course, inevitably, when the subbies do, email back to the main contractor, you can just drag and drop it into the system. So really that subcontractor interaction's been cherry on top.
I mean, it's things like that are simple ways of making things frictionless, having no login. It's amazing things like that can just make somebody go, right, forget it, I'm just going to email it over or fax it over.
Not another password.
Not another password. Yeah,
James, ironically, sort of going back on the sort of last question before around, obviously ability to harness data. There's a lot sort of sitting in spreadsheets. One of the things that actually lives right in the heart of our platform is an Excel spreadsheet in terms of the comparison and the bid leveling that happens, because there's some QSs, contract administrators in Australia, who you couldn't pry that spreadsheet out of their cold, dead hands, because the calculations can be really, really complex. One of the things that we've been able to do is actually sort of steer into that spreadsheet behavior, still be able to access some of that really rich pricing information, and then as a result, kind of being able to harness that. So, and that's actually the source of truth around your supply chain information of which subbies are we interacting with them, as where are they quoting, where are they winning work, have we got those purchasing opportunities or capacity risk. It's not, the data source is not who's interacting on your tendering platform, because we know people are emailing, text messaging, WhatsApping. It's actually, hey, who am I comparing right now in this spreadsheet? So there's some interesting quirks and also ways that you can develop smartly to make sure that you do get adoption of this new technology.
Well, I thought that was a masterstroke, because when I saw it, building in Excel, it's taking away the friction, because QSs or accountants, similar, they will not let go of their Excel spreadsheet. They love their Excel spreadsheet, so build it in. And then, I suppose as the iterations happen, eventually you can make them let go as the technology catches up. But it's quite a good way of introducing people to the platform to say, don't worry, there's still an Excel spreadsheet at the heart of it, but it's built within a platform that captures all the other data. It's very clever.
And look, it's not as if it's resistance to change, right? Like, some of it makes a lot of sense. If you can select 1,000 cells at a time and move it around really fast, compared to if you have to click a software interface 1,000 times, there's just pure adoption and productivity issues there, unless you can make the tech replicate, obviously the Excel experience. So, I mean, and then wrapped around that, right, James, as you've seen, there's a software platform that kind of looks and feels exactly the same as how they're procuring. So, people get terrified of change, but you kind of go, how's this to adopt? Well, if you know how to procure, then you kind of know how to use Procure Pro. So it's pretty light on training. They just kind of get in, use it, and you can get support in 60 seconds. Again, that kind of comes back to, the opportunities in these main contracting businesses to, go and change a dot control system versus get this into your business. Like, it's pretty low hanging fruit.
Cool. I've just got two questions, Alastair. I think there's two things that you said that's really interested me. The first thing is kind of, focusing on the idea of friction. And if you have an industry like construction, because I always find that industries that are quite receptive to technology, it's somewhat easier to build a product because you know what they want. They're engaging with you. So when you first built Procure Pro, how did you ensure product market fit when the engagement was typically lower within QSs and those within the industry?
Well, I mean, it was quite interesting. Like, even before Procure Pro, Yoshi, I go back to my first company, and we sort of had this, I describe it as a good problem to solve, but a bit of a hard product to sell. And so you'd go into these meetings and people would be pretty positive. And so you'd obviously have this hope, and we're a bit green then as well, but they didn't necessarily convert. And so you think it's going well, but actually, is it? And we had almost the golden goose of a customer, and then we had some key person shift and lost them, and learned some hard lessons and wore some bruises along the way. But then when we came to build Procure Pro, and we're sort of experimenting, building slides, going, hey, this is what we think we can build, going to market, going, hey, we think we can build this. Do you want to come on board as a foundation customer, help us shape this? I think that the feeling was really quite different around people going, hey, there is something here, and this is really interesting. And I think it's just the materiality of the problem that you want to solve. It isn't that kind of nice to have off the side. It's, main contractors, 90% of their costs go into their supply chain. Yeah. It's an area of construction that somehow people don't, or has never really been digitized before. Like, people say to us all the time, it's quite crazy, Yoshi, that you call them up, hey, we've got this procurement software, do you want to have a look at it? No, we got procurement sorted, we got tendering, we got estimating. And it's actually about those, 20 different fragmented different processes that don't talk to each other. And so you show them a few slides and they go, oh, well, we don't actually have this sorted. And then they see the product and then they say, how has no one done this before?
Yeah, and that's awesome. And then the other thing I was going to ask you, so you mentioned, I really like the idea of, giving space to your teams to experiment. I think that's awesome, which must mean they're coming up with some good ideas. I'm going to be cheeky and ask you, can you give some insight into some of those things you're looking at? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we're pretty public with our customers in terms of a roadmap. So it's not some state secrets, and it's not the roadmap that never comes in the never. We're delivering stuff sort of, this quarter, next quarter type thing. And we empower all of our team to basically pull it out, share the screen, show them what we're working on. So you're kind of pretty confident for the next 6 months, and then everything else is almost, in buckets of stuff. There's probably like a bunch of key thematics. There's your core platform, which you're just continuing to mature. There's a sort of a big impetus in the tier one space in particular for just adding more and more controls into the process. So whether that's a bit more control around, approvals and automating that side of things, milestone baselines and tracking shift, and therefore getting greater insights around how do we help drive performance. The supply chain side of things, we've just done compliance management, we've done vendor ratings, which was a massively hot topic. We're using AI now to summarize ratings, where we've just done lessons learned. So that problem around, hey, we don't learn our lessons, or we might have a project review meeting, but they don't go anywhere. It's from a commercial and procurement perspective. How do you put them into a centralized database and then surface them at the right time when someone's about to, let that next trade for earthworks? They need to know, what are the lessons that we've learned in the past. So that's a few of the things that we've done recently. The big sort of thematics coming into this year coming is really around supply chain, continuing to enhance that. It's adding on a few more document control systems to improve our tendering experience. And then it's in the data side of things. How do we level up our data strategy as a company, both internally and then externally, for the benefit of our customers? So separating that team and then making sure that all of our engineering teams are thinking kind of data first around, like, what if or what could be done, as opposed to just sort of, executing orders.
Cool. Excellent. Well, listen, Alastair, we're getting towards the end of the podcast. I just want to ask a couple kind of off-topic questions, if you like, more about you, because another part of what you do is that you're guest lecturer, aren't you, at a university? So if you could invite any historical figure to be a guest lecturer at any university, who would it be and why? Who would you want to listen to?
Historical, as in, dead or
well, it can be whoever you want, dead, or let's say dead or alive. Make it nice and broad.
I'm a massive fanboy in tech. There's a guy called Jason Lemkin who started Adobe, or what's now Adobe Sign. So he's one of the guys in SaaS who he's just incredibly helpful. And so I digest his stuff daily. And I think there's just some really good practical lessons to learn in company building, and it's also just honestly great lessons in marketing. How do you be really, really helpful to an industry, and more than anything, that helps the industry get better as a whole. So we try to employ that in our own marketing. There's a whole lot more coming on that front this year. So he's my guy.
Excellent. Well, that's well within the possibilities to hear him speak, I guess. So go for it. The other question was sort of advice. We like to get some advice from our guests to our listeners of any construction or non-construction related book, podcast, or resource that's sort of either shaped your thinking in the past or shaping your thinking at the moment that you can recommend.
Yeah,
apart from Project Flux, of course.
Yeah, of course. I like to go on the book side of things. It sort of sounds fairly basic, but the lean startup is something that I took a lot out of early days when getting into tech. And for those construction folks who haven't read it before, it's sort of almost one of the big startup books that's sort of all about how do you optimize for learning really quickly and speed of iterations, and sort of don't overplan things and just get moving. And I find it's sort of almost like a helpful thing to point out, because I get heaps of people coming to me asking for advice, going, hey, I've got this idea. And obviously, you give people a bit of time. And what I normally do is I say, look, I'll give you my time, I'll give you my thoughts. I'm pretty blunt and honest around it. And then go at the end of the call, normally I say, look, this book, did a lot for me. It'll change the way you think. Most people think, I need money to buy engineers to build a product, and you actually don't. The first thing you need to do is try to sell. And if you can't sell a slideshow, then, maybe your thing isn't good enough. And if you can't ask to get money, coming in, or some sort of commitment, then there's no point getting, the engineers and the money to try to build the thing. So I took these lessons out of that. And then what I do, I say, hey, you should read this book. And 90% of people don't actually read it. So I'm challenging you to read it and then send me a message and tell me what you thought of it. And it's still 90% failure rate, but at least it sort of instigates some people to, take positive steps and take action.
Yeah, and I think there's a reason it's a staple on so many people's list, that book, and it's sort of timeless as well, is because of those universal principles. They just make sense. So, yeah, excellent. Well, listen, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find out more about Procure Pro? We'll, of course, put links in the show notes, but is there any kind of place you want to direct people to?
Yeah, procurepro.co, not .com. Just Google us, check out the website. I'm on LinkedIn, really active as well. So if you're listening and like the podcast, want to say g'day, then definitely shoot me an ad.
Cool. Well, we'll get your LinkedIn on the show notes as well, so people can just click and follow through to you. But thank you so much for coming on. We'd love to get you back, in a while, so you can tell us the progress that you're making, and we can hear some of these features that you're working on. I've made it into the next iteration of Procure Pro. But thank you so much, Alastair.
Yeah, exactly, James. Rate of change is fast in 2025, so hopefully sooner rather than later. But thanks a lot for having me, James and Yoshi.
Absolute pleasure.
Project Flux is here.
Just want to give a big shout out to our sponsors, Construct AI. For anyone interested in looking at Construct AI, the link's in our show notes. There's a free tier that you can play around with. Yoshi and I have been using it for a good year since it was originally launched, and we get a huge amount of value out of it. So I thoroughly encourage everyone to go onto the Construct AI site and have a play around.
Cool. And guys, before we sign off, please don't forget to share, follow, and like all of our stuff. So that helps us to engage with you and understand a bit more about what you want, so we can bring it to your doorstep as early as possible.
See you later, everyone.